Alright, welcome back. Thanks for sticking around. In this kind of video, I'm going to go over how to get a text box set up, how to break it up into chunks, and get a text a piece of text working so that you can place it somewhere throughout the page or get a story in. So, for the first thing you have to do is obviously make the text box. And you can do that just by selecting this T tool type, and you can draw any rectangular shaped text box. I want my text for, say, this purpose just to be 3 columns wide, so I'm going to draw it over these 3 columns. In all scenarios that you're going to be working with for designing for the newspaper Central Times, all of our templates are going to be laid out with these columns, so you'll never have to worry about laying out the framework for each document. These are always going to be here, so you don't have to worry about too much beyond that. But if you'll notice, let's see if I just fill this with some placeholder text. I make it our font size 9/10.8. We'll fill this with more. This is quite unappealing. It's going straight over the columns. That's pretty difficult to read, and if that's a newspaper. So you want it to be in individual, neat columns. And the way you're going to do that is by selecting the text box and selecting up here. There is it's kind of a number of columns is the name of the tool, and it has a little visual with some columns. And right now you can see it's on 1 because we have a total of 1 column. Now, since this you can see on the template frame is spread across 3 columns, I want this text to be 3 columns wide. So I'm going to increase that number to 3, and now you can see that the text perfectly aligns with the grid because it's set over a 3-column space, and I've told the text box I want it to be 3 columns wide. Now if you make this a little wider, now the columns aren't going to line up with the template frame, because now the definition of a column to the text box is a little different than that to the page. And there are some cases where you might want to use that, but most of the time you want to keep your text box columns and your page columns the same. So you want to keep it stretched across 3 text boxes, then you would set it, or 3 columns, then you would set your text box grid to 3 columns as well. Now in this case I have placeholder text. Of course, in a real when you're designing your paper, you would go into your Google Doc somewhere within the Google Drive, copy and paste your content into the text box. Now, once you have your text box set up and it's set into the number of columns you want, you can kind of move that around however you please. But the first thing you want to do is organize the text, because right now, if you paste this in here, InDesign doesn't recognize indents or returns in Google Doc, or paragraphs in Google Docs. It just recognizes a return when the end of a paragraph is reached. So what you can do is, I just typed Command A, and that's going to select all the text within the text box, is you can tell it to indent wherever there's a return, the end of a paragraph. So you want to make sure you delete all of the indents left behind by Google Docs. If some people type an extra space, it might cause an awkward indent. You want to delete those and make sure it's just a return every time there's a new paragraph. And then InDesign knows where to put a new paragraph. And the way you're going to do that is up here, select your text, and you'll see a number of different indent tools. And the one you really care about the most for just body text like this is this bottom left one. You can see there's an arrow, and it's pushing the first line of the text over. We all know that's an indent. Now, my program's laid out in inches right now. I would actually suggest you set it to points rather than inches, just because it's a little bit easier to manage and less decimal places. But in this case, I have mine in inches. So I would set our indent to 0.125 inches. And you can see that's going to push the first line of every new paragraph over 0.125 inches. And that way you don't have to go through and manually add an indent for every paragraph. InDesign's going to look for it and set it for you. I believe what 0.125 inches is about 9 points. You can check in the Google Doc the design handbook for a conversion. I believe it's also on the wall in the office. Now, once you've got your text box set up and you've added your indents to your text, it looks all good. You'll notice that there's a real jagged edge at the end of each column, and to be honest, that doesn't look very nice. Um, it's a little bit choppy. The page doesn't look as well organized and is aesthetically pleasing. So the way you deal with that is actually to click in your text box, Command A again, or Control A, depending on your computer, all of your text, and you're going to see these alignment options. Some of these might look familiar, some of them might not. You see them in Google Docs as well. This example, we have center aligned. You'll pretty much never use center aligned. Almost always you're going to be using some kind of left alignment. For headlines, you want this align left, and that's it. But for a body text, when it's making up such a large chunk of the page and you're going to have it breaking up columns, you want it to have clean edges, and the way you do that is by selecting this bottom left. It's left justified and right justified on every line except for the end of a paragraph. That way you get a nice break at the end of a paragraph so that the reader can see the paragraph's over and it jumps to the next one. And it's a little bit confusing, but it makes sense once you click it, and you'll see it left and right justifies, double justifies, some people call it, the text, and that way at the end of a paragraph it's not going to stretch the text all the way to the right. That setting would look like this, and you can see, well, yes, this is a nice geometrically and aesthetically pleasing layout. You get lost. You can't find the end or beginning of a paragraph as easily. So what you want to do is make sure you have that last line cut off wherever it ends up, rather than having InDesign stretch it all the way to the right to be justified. And that's also going to cut out some awkward spacing that sometimes happens when you have a shorter word or a longer word. And that's going to make your text easier to read for the reader and aesthetically pleasing for someone just glancing over. And that also creates more entry points versus having your text completely justified, because a reader might want to search for each individual paragraph, and as we stated earlier, having multiple points of entry is the easiest way to get somebody to read that paper, because every time there's a point of entry, that's another opportunity that somebody can go in and start reading.